John from Ripewave Audio back again with Marantz's latest AV receiver, the Cinema 30, in this unit that sells for $4,500. This is the second in our series, and today we're going to cover the configuration using the setup assistant that's built into this unit when you first power it on, and we'll go through that initial Audyssey calibration. For those who watched the similar content for the Denon AVR X6800H, there'll be a lot of duplicates here because we didn't find any real differences in the setup from Denon 6800. However, we did enhance this video over that content we produced a few weeks ago for Denon, so you still may want to tune in. And as we said, this continues our series. We produce these videos in both a long form on this channel and shorter versions on our Ripewave Xpress. So our prior video, we did the unboxing and the overview of the Marantz Cinema 30, and content is available for both channels. So if you have less time and only 10 minutes, go over and check out Ripewave Xpress. We have this comparison matrix that we went over last time, and just to review for those who may not have attended, this unit fits below the AV10, which is their processor separate that sells for a lot more money at $7,000, and just above the Cinema 40, but about $1,000 more. You also pay $1,000 more over the Denon equivalent, as shown in this comparison, that 6800 that we talked about. And so if you like the feature sets but don't have $4,500 to spend, well, the Denon equivalent may be the path for you. But there are some nice things about the Cinema 30 that gives you a little different experience over the Denon. So I'll leave that for you to decide. One thing that we noticed right away when we started to use the Marantz Cinema 30 regarding its quality, here is the remote that we got with our Cinema 50. And of course, we have our Cinema 50 here in black. It's still in our rack. That's our long-term purchase. We've had it for over a year now. And then the Cinema 30. Now, they look the same on this video, but if you hold them in your hands, you start to notice some differences. The Cinema 30 remote is noticeably heavier, and that extra weight really gives you a much better feel. You know, some of these remotes are starting to feel really light, but this particular one, that extra weight just gives you that much better experience. The other thing we noticed is the Marantz logo on the bottom has raised letters versus the one from the Cinema 50 that I'm holding. There's Cinema 40 was the same, just has a silkscreen Marantz on it. While these function exactly the same, when you use the one from the Cinema 30, you feel like you're using a higher class product. So as a reminder, the Cinema 30 just came out. It has 11 channels of amplification, 140 watts into 2 channels. If you use the 70% rule, that's 98 watts into 5 channels driven. And it will allow for layouts of a 7.4.6 or a 9.4.4 configuration. And it supports all the formats: Dolby Atmos, DTS:X Pro, Aural 3D 13.1, of course the new Sony 360 Reality Audio, all making use of these speakers. Now, if you're stepping up from a unit that has less channel support, you particularly want to do some planning about how you're going to configure this, particularly if you're coming from a Cinema 40 or 50 that had 2 less channels on it. You are going to have that capability. There's less compromises. So if you were looking at the Cinema 40-50, you're not able to use rear surrounds in certain configurations, such as those 5 and 6 channels that are often used with Aural 3D setups. So you'll have to shut those off. But with this Cinema 30, with the extra channels, you'll be able to keep those rear surrounds on more cases. But where you're still making a compromise is on your front wides. And in some cases, you'll have to disable front wides in order to get certain Aural 3D configurations, or if you want to do a third row of heights. So we're going to get into that a little further. We have this chart so you can always pause and take a look at it. What's great about Denon Marantz is a lot of flexibility. You can use ceiling speakers, you can use wall-mounted height speakers or Dolby reflective speakers on your height channels. So you do have a choice of those 3 different types, and they allow for things like voice of God top center and height front center speakers, which we don't see on all units that support Aural 3D. So more to come on that. When you first power up the Cinema 30, it's going to bring you into the setup assistant, and it's going to ask you about what language. Now, we could proceed immediately with this, but one thing that we like to do, because there's usually an update, even though this is brand new, this only came out a couple of weeks ago, we did find that were software updates for this. So we exit out of the setup so we can configure the network and then do our updates. So that's exactly what we did. We went in, hit the back button. Do you want to leave Setup Assistant? We said yes. We then go back into Setup Assistant from the Setup menu, and we scroll down to Network because the network setup doesn't come until later. So we went through the wizard here for the network setup. We say Next. There's a lot of different choices for configuring a network. We find the simplest way is just taking it from the Apple iOS device. That way we don't have to enter in long passwords, but we've done it both ways. And you could scan from available networks and select the SSID and manually enter the password. But by using your phone, you bring that phone within range of the unit. In fact, we find we don't even have to put the antennas on to have this really work. As long as your iOS device is 10.0.2 or later, then this will work and it will verify and connect. And we put it on the same network as we use for all this equipment. Once connected, you'll play some audio through your speakers. If you hear that, you can say, I can hear that, and you give it a name. Now, we use the default name of the receiver because we have so many units in here. Calling everything home theater would be confusing because our Cinema 30 and our Denon and all that would all have the same name. So we give it the model name. What you'll notice throughout this is they keep pushing you to turn on auto update. Now, generally speaking, I would put this on, but because I'm testing these units so much, I want more detail about what's going on with an update. And I find that auto update doesn't always give me the opportunity to see what's included. And particularly with Denon Marantz, I find it hard to see release notes on their products when they do come up with a new version because they know these things are all connected. When you disable auto update, when you power up these units, when a new update is available, it will still warn you. It will still notify you when you power up these units, and it will say a new update is available. When you do it manually, it will actually tell you the types of things that are available with the update. So that's why I select no here. Put in my time zone. I'm able to leave the Setup Assistant. To do a firmware update manually, I can go to General, and I can scroll down to Firmware and do a check for update. And we're going to hit Update Now. And again, it's asking us if we want to turn off auto update. And it will warn you that we are turning off during the update, and it will download first from the internet the new update, bring it to your receiver, and at some point it's going to turn black on the screen. You can follow along on your front display. And once this is all loaded, and I find that their times are conservative, it takes less than 9 minutes in this case to actually do the update. So to see which version got installed with this update, we go into General and we hit Information, and I go to Firmware. And here's the version that's currently installed, 5100 XXX. This long number, I'm not sure the numbering convention that Marantz and Denon use with it, but this is it. The DTS version doesn't seem to change that often. I'm going to back out of this. We could go into Setup Assistant, but if I do a restart, I want to see if there's more updates. So I'm going to do a restart, posting this question about Do we want to improve Marantz's products? I agree to it because I do send the usage data to Denon Marantz because I want to help them out if there's any troubleshooting and error codes that I happen to experience. I'd like to give them that information to improve these products just where I'm sitting, and I always want to see these companies evolve and do better. It is saying that there's new firmware available for direct live bass control. Even though we just did this update, now they're saying there's another update to do the direct live. So sometimes you have to layer these updates in. So when I restart the receiver, it comes back with this message saying that new firmware is available. We're going to do the update now. And here's where I was talking about, you get the information about the upgrade. This is for direct live bass control upgradability. And it's going to take 7 minutes this time. Again, it's telling me, do I want to turn on auto updates? So it keeps trying to get me to do that. And the update process is the same in this case. And when we get done, we take a look at the version one more time. And we do see it has changed. DTS version has stayed the same, but the firmware rev has changed. Again, I can't make sense of their numbering convention. At this point, all the updates are applied. We can go back into Setup Assistant. By default, it's being highlighted on Language Select. If you start with Language Select, it's going to take you back to this menu and have to manually select each one of the menu items as you go. If you go to Begin Setup, as we're going to do here, it's going to sequentially run you through each of these. So that's what we'll do. We're going to select this time English for the language. That's going to talk about the proper configuration is essential, tells you what you need, what's included in the package, and the things that are not. Of course, speakers and cables and all that are not included. And it's going to talk you through this. You want to make sure that all your speakers are in place. I don't recommend you configuring this for a layout that you don't already have in place. So let's say you were planning to add front wides. I would configure these initially with front wides disabled. And then at the time you get them, then enable it. Because what it's going to try to do with the calibration, it's going to think that you have front wides and report that as an error because those speakers are not active. Do you have more than 11 speakers? What we have in our room is a 9.2.4 configuration. So that's 9 at ear levels, including the front wides. We have 2 subwoofers. We have one on the front left and one in the rear right, sort of like a 1/3, 2/3 into the room positioning. It's telling here that while the Cinema 30 is capable of processing 13 channels, it only has 11 built-in amplifiers. So one pair has to be powered externally. We're going to set that for the front. We actually have more than just the front speakers that we have amplifiers for. In fact, we have enough external amplifiers for everything but one pair. But for the setup wizard, ignore the fact that you may have more external amplifiers because it's going to default to both the internal amplifiers and the pre-outs being active simultaneously for everything but, in this case, the front speakers, where the amplifiers will be turned off and the signal will only go to the pre-outs for the front. It will talk about wiring, and if you're fairly new to home theater or stereo equipment in general, this may be very helpful for you about how to prepare your speaker wires. And it will even tell you everything down to stripping the wires, knowing what's positive and negative on that wire with the help button. And even when you hit next, it's even going to talk about splitting the cable, removing 3/8 or 10 millimeters of shielding from each wire, and then the twisting of the individual wires so they are not frayed and you don't have any whiskers sticking out, loosening the speaker terminals, inserting the bare wires, and then tightening that terminal. And then for the front speakers, which we told the system will be externally powered, it's actually showing where to plug in for the pre-outs, for the right channel, and for the left channel. Of course, if you have more, you're going to be doing the same thing, but for those other channels. Is just not going to talk about anything but one pair on the pre-outs. It's asking if you have a center speaker. We do. Again, it's expecting it to be wired to the amplifiers, In our case, we're going to go to an external amp. Do you have surround speakers? Yes. And when they mean surround, they're talking about side surrounds. Where to wire them? If you're using the amps for right and left channels, do you have surround speakers in the back of the room? Yes, we do. We actually have two, but if you're still using just one rear surround, it can account for that as well. Where to wire it for right and left channels if you're using the internal amplifiers. Do you have front wides? Yes, we do. Again, here is where you wire it to the amplifiers. In our case, we're using the Cinema 30 amplifiers for this. We actually did wire it here. We have just got another Emotiva XPA DR2 two-channel differential reference amplifier. That's kind of our standard now. We have their mono blocks from their second generations doing our front stage, except for the front wides. That's going to be the DR2. We have another DR2 doing our side surrounds and a third DR2 doing our rear surrounds. We just don't have that new Emotiva wired up enough yet, so we're just going to take the easy route and just power it from the Cinema 30. Now they're going to ask about height channels. So here you have a choice of none, 2-pair, or 4-pair based off the selections that I made. Remember, I have front wides and rear surrounds. So these choices are limited. If I turn off front wides, I get more choices. If I turn off rear surrounds, that doesn't impact the choices, only the front wide. In my case, I have a 9.2.4, so I'm going to select 4 speakers, 2 pairs. Now, if I had turned off front wides, I have all these choices. We have a couple options for center height and a couple options for top surround. In cases, we can actually use both a top surround and a center height simultaneously. Or we can have 3 rows of height speakers with a 6-channel layout on the heights. Back to our setup, we can configure our first row as front, top middle, or front Dolby. In our case, it is top front mounted in the ceiling. For the second row, they could be mounted in the ceiling, as in top rear, mounted on your wall in rear height. They could be the side surrounds, as in surround Dolby, or rear surrounds, as in back Dolby. We're going to configure as top rear, as ours are ceiling mounted. And here is how you do the wiring for all those height speakers. Now, if you did want to go explore different configurations, and I know a lot of you are interested in Aural 3D, if you're looking to do an Aural 9.1 configuration, on that choice, you would disable your rear surrounds and your front wides. You would select a 4-speaker layout. And your first row would be front heights, and your second row would be rear heights. While Aural 3D prefers wall-mounted height speakers for these, you, of course, could choose the other options. We're just showing the Aural 3D preferred defaults. Alternatively, you could come out of the setup wizard and configure these through the speaker layout under the manual speaker settings. Let's look at Aural 10.1, which adds in the Voice of God channel. So in this case, you want to select 5 speakers, 2 pairs, plus the top surround. When you go through the wizard, it's going to only give you a choice for front height speakers. And then for the rear, then it's going to give you a choice. Are you just doing a top surround, or are you doing a top surround with surround height speakers? Here's what it would look like if you did the manual configuration. I will point out for this 5-channel layout, it could be that top surround as discussed, or a center height. That's a second option. Now, if you want to do an Aural 11.1 configuration, so you're going to be configuring it for 6 speakers. This will be 2 pairs with a top surround and a center height. So this is without rear surrounds or front wides, once again. Once you've chosen 6 speakers with this configuration, you're given one choice for the front row, that's front heights with a center height. And then they're giving you 2 choices again for the second row. It's either just the top surround or top surround with the side surround height speakers. And here's what it would look like with a manual configuration. If you want the full Aural 13, which is something that this receiver gives you over the Cinema 50 and the Cinema 40, you will prepare for this by enabling your rear surrounds, but still keeping your front wides disabled, and then selecting 6 speakers, 2 pairs, top center, and center height, just as we did in the previous example. So again, one choice for the front row, that's front heights plus center height, and then for the second row, it will be the choice of just the top surround or the surround heights plus top surround. In this case, if we're doing 13.1, you want that second option. And here's what it would look like with a manual configuration. I'll throw out one more option here, which is not an Aural 3D configuration, but if you want to have 3 rows of heights, you will again want to make sure that front wides is disabled, and then you select 6 speakers, but this time just 3 pairs. You'll choose your type of speaker for each row, first row, second row, and third row. With third row, it seems like they're only giving me a choice of height. What I've noticed is that if you choose front height, it will try to match your rear heights with the same type of speaker. If I had chosen top front, that third row would also be top rear. So keep that in mind. In some cases, the manual configuration is going to give you some extra options, but there are still some combos that you can't come up with, and I will refer you back to that earlier chart as well. So moving on, regardless of how you're choosing your speaker layout, you now have to choose your subwoofer configuration. So do you have subwoofers or not? Yes, we do. You can choose up to 4 subwoofers that are independently controllable. If you have more than that, you can always use splitters and have common control off of some of those speakers. You have a choice of 1, 2, 3, or 4 subwoofers. We have 2, so that's how we're going to leave it. Now you have a choice of either standard or directional. And I want to make a point here that it's using the same output for standard. And this is going to impact you as you go into things like Audyssey, room calibration, even Mult-EQ-X. If you go into directional, you're going to have the ability to independently send signals. But with the standard, you're not. Some of the text here might be a little confusing. I'll just show you the difference. So if we set it to standard, when I bring up Audyssey Mult-EQ-X, it's just showing one line for subwoofers. Even though you have 2, 3, or 4, it's going to treat those all as one. But if we set it to directional, now you have 2 items on Audyssey Mult-EQ-X, one for the first and one for the second. So if you have 3, 4, you'll actually see 4 entries. So I recommend hitting directional whenever you have multi-subwoofers. Then it's going to ask you where are these located. And you have only 2 choices, 2 in the front, 1 in the front, and 1 in the rear. And this has been a complaint of some. You don't have much flexibility of where you can tell the system these are located. In my case, the closest thing is 1 front, 1 rear, even though they're kind of like a 1/3, 2/3, but they are at opposing sides of the room as shown. Not everybody can do this from room constraints, etc. So if you choose 3, they're expecting 2 in the front and 1 in the back. If you choose 4, they're looking for corner placement. So not a lot of flexibility there. It's not clear to me about how Marantz and Denon are using this information. But regardless, they show you to use the pre-outs. There's separate pre-outs for each, subwoofer 1, 2, 3, and 4. And when we're all done with the subwoofers, it gives you a summary of everything you just configured. I recommend reviewing this, hitting the scroll down too. It's not obvious that the scroll down, so you actually have to move your cursor up to where that scroll bar is and then hit the down arrow to see what's on the lower parts of this, as we're showing here. So to expose everything down to the top, front, and rear speakers. Now it's going to test to see that everything is wired up correctly. Now it tells you to first make sure your subwoofers are at around 30%. I know my subwoofers, 50% is a good place. So I didn't actually move it to 30. I just know my system well. I turned on all the external amplifiers, and then it's going to walk you through each speaker. Did you hear sound through the left front, center, right front, right front wide, rear right surround speaker, right surround back, left surround back, left surround, left front wide, right top front, right top rear, left top rear, left top front, front subwoofer, and rear subwoofer. If you have more or less, it's going to match what you configured. Now it's ready for speaker calibration. If you have no desire to use Audyssey, you can bypass this step by hitting skip. We're running it through because we're going to do comparisons between the built-in Audyssey and what we get from Dirac Live, similar to what we did with Denon. They want you to then set up the microphone on a tripod, and if you don't have one, they've supplied this cardboard one. Having a tripod, particularly one with a boom extension on it, is really the best way to go. And then you take the microphone that came with your Marantz unit, and it has to be that microphone. It's this Eiffel Tower looking thing, and that plugs into the setup microphone. That input that is exposed when you pull down the front door. They have you go through an 8-position calibration. When you're using the built-in tools, there's not a lot of options. There's a particular way to do it. They give you a set number of positions. They don't give you any control to modify how this is going to be calibrated. With the first position being the main listening position, we put that microphone there and we were quiet. Then we begin the test. And this walks you through first. It gets the levels right with the subwoofers, with all the speakers. And once all the levels are good, and if it finds any major problems, it's going to pause the process, ask you to correct those things. It will report any phase issues. Marantz and Denon always seem to report a phase issue with our speakers. We know our wiring's good. We often double check, but in this case, we still had phase errors. The odd thing is, with each receiver I get from Denon Marantz, it's identifying the phase problems on different speakers. So I don't completely trust their algorithm. I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to make sure you haven't wired things in properly. But you can always ignore and move forward once you have the confidence that your phase is correct. And once you finish the first position, it will ask you to move to each of the 8 different positions with the calibration happening in between each of them. Once that is completed, it will then do its final calculations and save the configuration. With the calibration complete, it's going to ask you if you want to enable some of the Audyssey features. It's like dynamic EQ and dynamic volume control. We turn those off. Dynamic EQ is going to raise the bass and treble as volume is decreased from reference levels. Now, reference level is much too high for a lot of listeners. So when you back down bass and the treble proportionally to the volume going down, a lot of people prefer that bass being uplifted, but not always the treble. So this is partially why I disable it. At this point, it's preparing you to start the network configuration, which we've already done. And by doing so, they're saying to put the antennas on the back of the unit. I find that this unit works just fine in my environment without the antennas. I guess it's all depends on how far away the nearest access point is and how close you're going to be with your mobile devices. But you can put them on, and they give you the instructions here to how to screw them on, making sure it's fully turned clockwise, and then to rotate the antennas upwards. Right? So you had these options. If you want to redo your network connection, or if you didn't skip it the first time, you can do it now. We can hit skip here. Always bypass the ARC or eARC connection. We don't use that. We prefer to have all the source material come in to the receiver. So we can have the on-screen display work. If you have your sources go into your television and then have the audio come back through eARC, what you're going to lose is your on-screen display. Now, if you're using one of the mobile apps or the web page all the time, that may not be an issue for you. But I'm just raising this up. That is going to be a side effect of having the sources go through the TV. Now, there are reasons why you may want to go to the TV, because it could improve the video signal. Some of these features, like quick media switching, where it's adjusting for frame rates within the same resolution, will only work as if you take your Apple TV into your TV that also supports this, and if you run it through your Denon Marantz, that feature is not going to work. So we just kind of work through the TV connections. I just say it's optical and move on here, but could have been anything. Then it's going to ask you to configure your inputs. By default, these are the inputs. You have a cable satellite connection, a media player, Blu-ray, Game 1, Game 2, aux 1, aux 2, CD, phono. We're going to configure ours as media player for this input, which is our Apple TV. It's HDMI connection. It's going to show you where to connect that media player. And then you hit the next button. We'll do a connection test. We could hear the music come through the Apple TV. So we are able to hit the next button. It gives you a green check when everything's successful. Then we're going to move to Blu-ray. That's also HDMI. Again, it's showing you where to place this in the back of the unit. It doesn't show you exactly which terminal here. There are suggestions on the back here. So I'm surprised they hadn't gone to that level of detail. Again, a connection test. That movie worked fine. We hit next. We got a blue check here. So there was enough here to kind of get me to know that things were good. So I just moved on. It's asking about the usage data again. We had already answered that previously. Just agree. Then it talks you through the mobile apps. There's several here. So first it's going to ask you for the Inhouse app. Now, if you already have Inhouse or on your phone, this might still be a good time to check to see if there's an update. They're updating these mobile apps from time to time. So the Inhouse app allows you to explore streaming services as well as your own library. The Marantz AVR app will give you access to volume control and sound mode settings. And this can be good because it's less distracting than bringing up an on-screen display. If you're in the middle of a movie and there's other people in the room, they don't want to see you going in and out of configuration settings. Then there's the Mult EQ Editor app that gives you a little more control and visibility over the Audyssey calibration process than you would with just the on-screen display, although they charge, I think, around $20 for that. Then there's the Dirac Live Correction technology. This takes you to the Dirac site. This is not a mobile app, but it gives you the access to the web page where you can purchase and download the Dirac application that runs from a PC or Mac. And then there's the online manual. There's no printed manual, just a getting started guide that comes with these. They say, enjoy. Your setup is complete. What I like to do here is take a look at the speaker configuration and what Audyssey did. I'll go into the speaker layout, and we can see here that we have speaker plus pre-out. What we want to do is change these all to pre-outs where we have external amplifiers. We'll do that for the center, the surround back, not the front wide, and the height speakers for front and rear. If you hit view terminal configuration, they're actually putting little labels under the pre-outs of what they'll be, because the silk screen doesn't always match what you configured. So this can be helpful here. So you don't always want to go by the silk screen on the back of the unit. You can go in and check results. Here we can look at the distances. These may be quite different than actual physical distances. Don't worry about that too much. We're looking for something that looks really abnormal though when we review that. But these are really designed to be time delays so everything hits your ears at the same time, regardless of the speaker. Then the levels, again, we're looking to see anything wildly different. I find it interesting using the same amplifiers that I got different levels with the Marantz Cinema 50 than with the 6800. This is quite a bit different. But I recall too that I didn't like the balance with the 6800 by default. Maybe this is going to be better by default. Crossovers, this is what Audyssey set it to. Front and center are set to full range, but don't be too alarmed about this right away because there's settings that are made in later parts here. And depending on the speakers, it was doing 40 or 80 hertz on the crossovers. And of course, you can change those. Equalizers, this is the filters really that Audyssey is configuring. There's a reference filter and a flat filter. It's reference as we configured by default when we finished the calibration. I'll call your attention, you have speaker presets in this. So if we go in from speaker manual setup to speaker preset, when we did the initial configuration, that was speaker preset 1. If you want to try different things out or have an alternate layout, you can move it to speaker preset 2 and go through similar steps to configure the second one. So if you're just trying out different calibrations or equalizations, you could configure the exact same layout and then just do your tone and filter differences. And these speaker presets are reachable through the options page. On the advanced section, you can go into low frequency effects, subwoofer outputs, and they're showing you graphically here. By default, it's LFE only, but you can change that to LFE plus main so that your subwoofers are getting not just the LFE signals, but some of those lower notes from your main speakers, even though they're set to full range. Low pass filter can be configured here. Default is 120 hertz. It can be as low as 80 hertz or as high as 250. For distribution, if you want to have low notes from other speakers in the system get redirected, you can have those be redirected to your front speakers, and you can set the level between -20 dBs and 0 dBs. You also have an option for 2-channel playback, so you can have your bass management be different for 2-channel playback by setting it to manual. You can even set up a tactile transducer. By default, it's disabled. You can enable that, adjust the level between -12 and +12 dBs, and set the low pass filter between 40 and 250 hertz. So what are your thoughts on the Marantz Cinema 30 with its capability of doing a 7.4.6 or a 9.4.4 configuration? There's a lot of flexibility. In fact, they have speaker options that are not available on all processors and receivers, like a top center speaker or a center height speaker for your Aural 3D 13.1 configurations. What are your thoughts on this? Do you like the flexibility that the Cinema 30 gives you with these speaker layouts? That feedback would be useful to the Ripewave audio community. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget our Patreon channel at www.patreon.com/Ripewave. Of course, you can always give us a one-time donation by hitting that thanks button. And then again, it doesn't cost anything to hit the bell notification so you're notified when the next video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.